Some of you, I see some of the names, identify them. Some, I haven't met the names yet, but my name is Julius Amin. I am a professor here in the history department, and I'm also the alumni chair in the humanities. I welcome all of you to this event, to this Symposium of Race event. And today's event is setting the context for the symposium. So this symposium builds on the first one we had about 5 years ago. So again, I thank you very much for coming this afternoon. The goal of the symposium is to study the history of race relations at the university and to understand a sense of trends and attitudes and to outline potential steps toward building a more inclusive campus. The symposium is designed to educate, inform, and bring to the forefront conversations of race on campus. Speakers of the symposium include faculty, staff, students, and alumni. Attendees come from all over campus and the larger local community. In fact, I have some friends in Ghana and Nigeria who told me that they're going to tune in. The planning and execution of the symposium is the collaboration, that of collaboration, boldness, ingenuity, and commitment. I want to introduce to you the speakers of today's session, the panelists. And let me just say a word or two about them. They are all members of the planning committee of this symposium. They have been working on this since September of last year. We've met bi-weekly. And I want to just take a minute or so to extend to them my appreciation and thank them for the dedication they have put on this important subject, or important topic. I will introduce the speakers of this event based on the order in which they'll be speaking. So if I call someone's name the first, that person will be speaking first, right? And so we agreed to this order, I think, right? So we have Dr. Ashley Lawrence Sanders, Assistant Professor in the History Department, will go first. Ms. Meredith Allen, Associate Dean of Students and Executive Director, Multi-Ethnic Education and Engagement Center, will go second. Dr. Lawrence Bonley, the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, will go third. Dr. Tom Morgan, Associate Professor in the Department of English and Director of Ethnic Studies program at the university, will follow Dr. Bonley. Dr. Dennis James, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy and Director of Women's Studies program here at the university, will follow Dr. Morgan. Then Dr. Joel Bruce, Associate Professor of Human Rights Studies, Department of Political Science at the University of Dayton, will be the final speaker. So all the speakers, all the presentations will be made. And after the presentations, there'll be room to answer some questions and engage in discussions. So we agreed that each speaker will have about 10 to 15 minutes to speak. And after all presentations, we'll open the event to questions, comments, and discussions. While the presentations are going on, please submit all your questions on the chat at any time during the presentations. There was someone, Heidi has in our office has generously agreed to be collecting the questions, which she will forward to me, and I will hand them over to the speakers. Again, one last thing, and I think all of you have heard, anytime you've participated in a Zoom event, you've heard someone say this. Let us make sure we mute our volume, right? So, Dr. Sanders, I'm going to turn over to you.
Oh, thank you, Julius, for this excellent welcome and for really sort of shepherding this program again 5 years later at another crucial time, I think, for our nation, for our state, for our city, for the university. So I'm happy to offer some remarks, just briefly about, my perspective coming into the symposium planning committee, a bit of a disciplinary perspective as a historian and what I see as why this symposium is so important. And a bit about why I think the student session that I'm co-chairing with Merida is really essential for understanding race on this campus. Thank you all for being here and kicking this off. I'm sure it's going to be a provocative, thought-provoking, and hopefully informative week of events ahead. So first, a little bit about why this symposium is so important to me, which I think really brings me full circle to some of the earliest conversations I had on this campus about race. The 2016 symposium was mentioned to me before I even set foot on campus by Julius. As one of the ways this UD was sort of seeking to regularly discuss issues of race on campus. When I had specific questions about the university's history with Black students, with Black faculty and staff, Julius pointed me to the proceedings from the 2016 symposium, gave me physical copies as part of a way of sort of beginning to provide answers to those questions and providing some of the history that I was seeking as a new faculty member on campus that was really interested in these ideas. As a historian, the archival work that's being performed by the student researchers really drew my attention to this project in the first place and made me very happy to be part of this planning committee. I thought it was the kind of work that seemed both overdue and necessary when considering the longer history of the university. I think it was also about the beginning of me considering my own space here and my work as a historian and as a Black historian and a Black women historian on this campus, finding my space within that history and that historical legacy and narrative as well. I'm very fascinated by the type of micro narratives that institutions create, and being a part of the UD's community means I was very fascinated with the type of historical narrative that UD was creating. The work that Black students in particular have been doing on campus to really illuminate the past of Black folks on campus and the various different Black communities on campus, as well as the activism ongoing, are important efforts to both complicate and broaden the official historical narratives about University of Dayton just a little bit. Projects that do this work include the student researchers from 5 years ago, our very excellent student researchers this year, the work of organizations like BATU to establish their timeline of Black history here at UD, all are ways that Black students are seeking to see themselves and write themselves as well into a historical tradition here on campus. Changes on campus cannot happen unless we actually know the history and see the connections between the past and the present. This is what history can give us as a discipline, the knowledge and pathway to explore these connections. And this is why, in particular, I was very happy to serve on this committee and to serve again with student researchers who are really uncovering some really excellent connections that place what happens on the University of Dayton with much larger national conversations and histories that occurred within the last 50, 60, 70 plus years. So even starting with the creation of BATU, the late 1960s and 1970s, seeing the connection of UD students to the greater Black studies movement and Black student movement that was happening nationally at the time is really important because it situates UD as not in any way an outsider, but actually part of a much longer and storied narrative of Black students' activism on campuses at large. The symposium really matters, I think, because it once again asks us all to examine the state of things through the lens of past, present, and future. The extent to which we can examine new possibilities for what the future of students of color and Black students on this campus looks like really has to go through the extent of knowing, highlighting, and most importantly, acknowledging the history behind it all. And I think this history continues to animate the current relations of students on campus as it is. Students' feelings of belonging or unbelonging are often related to a long historical trajectory of how Black students have experienced their time at University of Dayton. For the student panel that I'm co-chairing, this is incredibly important. Black student activists have been at the forefront of change on this campus for many decades now, and Black students continue to lead on the ways of imagining what an actual inclusive and welcoming campus should look like. The historian in me was very interested in reading what students said 5 years ago, and now I'm interested in comparing what this new research and student comments have to add to the historical narratives about race on UD's campus. There may be, in fact, some interesting new information regarding what has or has not changed in the last 5 years. This should not be surprising to many of us. Some of you guys have been on the campus much longer than me. I'm probably the newest person on the planning committee. But what I do know, of course, is history. And I know that history is not always a neat narrative of progress. Sometimes it stalls, sometimes it zigzags, sometimes it retreats. So what we may hear and see over the course of this next week may not present a very neat packaged narrative, but a complicated one, a nuanced one that actually will help us propel us forward. The fact is that historically a lot has happened in the last 5 years in our nation and on this campus. Our student researchers have been chronicling just that. What does race look like on the university campuses and in this campus post 2015, post 2016, post 2020 world, right? So much has gone on in the last 5 years. Students, faculty, and staff on campuses across the United States have dealt with several life-changing events that have changed people's perceptions and their understandings as citizens or residents of this nation, this state, and yes, part of the UD community. Yet, I would have to say as a historian, despite some assertions to the contrary about racial tensions being higher than ever, the historian me would say that this may not necessarily be the case. I would say that the knowledge and anger at the historical production and repetition of racism and white supremacy is higher. People are more frustrated now and less complacent. People are speaking more openly about race, racism, and white supremacy more than ever before. There have been a backlash to this open discussion as well. So what remains to be seen is how we continue to learn from the lessons of the past, how we navigate the backlash to these open conversations that have been happening over the past year. History can only light a path, but it does not have all the answers after all. This symposium's keen focus on the historical as part of the beginning of the process gives me hope that we can continue to ask and answer these questions going forward. So I'll just close here and say, I really look forward to our student session in particular, because it's highlighting the past, present, and possible future for students on UD's campus and Black students in particular. It's utilizing the rich history of those who came before them and the student panelists' own continued contributions to UD's history. These students have not only witnessed history, they have been history makers themselves. And telling their stories is a crucial part of ensuring that the narrative going forward is one that accurately reflects the varied, complicated, and rich experiences of Black students on this campus. We are living in multiple historical moments: an ongoing vibrant Black Lives Matter movement, a global pandemic, a reinvigoration of a racist political violence in our nation, and our own multiple moments here on UD's campus. As the historical research continues to prove, Black students have always had their voices. What always remains to be seen 5 years ago and today is how much everyone else listens. Thank you.
You're muted, Julius.
Okay, so I am getting better every day on this. So permit me if I continue to make mistakes. Right, again, thank you very much, Ashley. And we will proceed with Merida. Let me see, let me go back here. And so Ms. Merida Allen.
Thank you, Julius. And thank you, Ashley. It's been a pleasure to work with you during this experience. From my perspective, I just want to share, how did I come to be a part of this? And I had the pleasure in my first full year of working at the University of Dayton to attend the 2016 symposium. And as Ashley, Dr. Lawrence Sanders mentioned, it very much shaped my understanding of the space that I was entering. It very much gave me a unique perspective of the student experiences up until that point. And it helped me as an administrator in the Multi-Ethnic Education and Engagement Center be able to create relationships for students, not only to continue to create their narratives, but also it showed me that the students do look for those platforms and the opportunities to speak about their experiences. So I've committed to creating those spaces where students are able to talk about, and in spaces where they can share whether they had a positive, negative, or neutral experience, but to be able to do so and know that they are supported. So that has been really a joy of mine to have the opportunity to work directly with students. One of just, I don't know, a phrase that sticks with me here today and has stuck with me for a while, especially following the Maafa commemoration that we concluded last week. Lift every voice, lift every voice. And so that is, I think about, that's part of my personal philosophy and ways in which I work to make sure that the voices of our students are heard, the voices of our alumni are remembered, and the work of our institution moves forward, informed by them, inspired by them. And so working with students with understanding that they are going through not only student development, but also identity development transitions in their life. Also, while they are trying to maintain a status of being a student, a scholar, a success story, as many are pouring their hopes into them during this journey, it's also very relevant for me that it's important that those students have the space to be able to create their own sense of belonging, that students know that they matter on this campus. And so spaces such as these provide those opportunities. And this student session is what excites me about it, is an opportunity for peers to hear from peers, to engage with peers. And although our center does quite a bit of work to create and build community among students, it's really a unique opportunity for us to have them participate in a symposium that is dedicated not only to integrating their academic sort of journey. Also, you know, there are expectations for many students to participate in this from the class and the course identity that they have. So it's one thing for a student to opt in, but for students to really commit to being a part of this space is inspiring for me, because students are now able to maybe hear from someone that they hadn't crossed paths with any other space or any other time on this campus. And so the opportunity to strengthen that sense of belonging, that mattering for particularly our Black students who are participating in the panel is really a highlight for me. It will provide opportunities and will provide education for me on how I can better support those students. Again, we create spaces within our center and the work that I do to be able to build those relationships, but it is also very valuable for me to know where students are and to position them in these very formal ways to be able to present their perspectives and to really let us know if their experiences they feel. I will never forget the 2016 symposium, the student who now, I won't name the name, but a student who now says, I love UD with every fiber of my being, good, bad, and ugly. I still love my institution. That student in their first year was on the panel and said, I hate it here. I hate it. They had every opportunity, they had every connection. And we had a conversation after they spoke on that panel. And it really gave me some context around what they were talking about. As a first year student, that participant wasn't having a great experience in their first 6 months. They didn't anticipate that they would be facing systemic racism within their residence hall, amongst their peers in classroom settings. They didn't feel they were prepared for that. They felt that they were sold the flyer dream. And so going through, again, this transition of student and identity development, understanding who they were in the context of where they are, was really helpful for me to know who I'm working with. So it really helped to inform the way I worked with that class. That was a generation of students who were looking for a specific experience. Real life situation, my earring stuck. We'll just leave it. So I look forward to 2021 to have that same opportunity to work with students. I want to highlight really practically is one of the highlights, not only working with my colleagues to help to develop and shape and coordinate this symposium, but working with our student research assistants. They have dedicated themselves in a pandemic, even working over the winter break when the rest of the world was trying to be quiet. They were digging deep into a lot of the archives of our institution. They were turning over stones and making connections with all of our colleagues and alumni to be able to uncover and unveil some of, again, the good, the bad, and the ugly of our history from the last 5 years. So we did build upon from where the symposium of 2016 left until this point. So what we will be presenting of their findings will be of those past 5 years. So it's been quite a pleasure to be able to connect with them. Many of them history students, so they work with many of my colleagues here, and they have a genuine interest in the discipline, but also for them to be able to see that their probing questions are leading to more questions, and to be able to see how they are looking, what happens next. We've been asked by many of the researchers is what happens after tomorrow or after this session, where will my history live? And that's what I'm excited about, is that we don't just look at this as what was in the past and who were we at that time. But my question is to all of us is who will we be and how will we do that together? So I just want to take a moment to shout out the student researcher assistant. I don't think she was able to make it. She may have popped in and I didn't see, but Malia Wells, she's a junior. She is a phenomenal student leader on campus. And if you are able to attend the student session, she will be moderating that session with her peers, but she has done just phenomenal work, and we're looking forward to be able to present some of the research that she has done to continue to live as a part of the fiber of our institution. So with that, I thank you all for attending and looking forward to that student session. You're muted again, Julius.
Okay, thank you very much. By the end of this session, I'll be some kind of an expert right on this. So again, thank you very much, Maria. Again, this is wonderful. I just want to make sure that I also announce when that student session is. It is tomorrow morning from 10 to noon. Again, so as Ashley and Meredith stated that these students have been working, they've really engaged in a lot of research. And we have an opportunity to listen to them tomorrow morning. Again, thank you very, very much. And so Dr. Bondley, let me see, let me go back to this. Again, as I said, I will be an expert by the time this comes to an end. Okay, Larry's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Amin. This is extraordinary opportunity, and thank you for your leadership, for the leadership and work of our colleagues on the planning committee, and just grateful for the opportunity to share and to learn in this experience. So I want to talk a bit about the state of race with regard to curriculum. And raise a question for our consideration as we go on this journey together. I arrived at the University of Dayton in July of 2016, and I am happy to say, and really quote Dr. King when he was on our campus, I believe in 1964, when he was asked the question about the state of race relations in this nation, and while he was on this campus, his response was, well, we have come a long, long way, but we have a long, long way to go. And so as we begin this conversation over the next several days, I think Dr. King's words are as true today as it was then. I think it was in November of 1964 when he said those, what I consider prophetic words. Since I've arrived here at the university as the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion, we have made some strides. We've launched a comprehensive strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We recently launched a 11-step action plan, which is an expression of UD's commitment to be an anti-racist institution. These are to be applauded, but I have to raise the question, when we look at the curriculum 5 years ago, when this symposium last occurred to this day, has our narratives and have our stories as African-American people and other marginalized groups moved any closer to the center of intellectual discourse, to a place where we can say without question that not only do our lives matter, but that our narratives matter and our stories matter. As a historian, I've had the privilege in the years before arriving at UD and the honor of engaging extraordinarily bright and intelligent students at colleges and universities throughout the United States. As a result of the ubiquitous reach of core curricular content that we're required to read in order to be deemed well-educated, I've had the the opportunity to see how core curricula has impacted not only students, but many of their faculty, and how they have been stamped with the seal of approval as being well educated by educational institutions, public, private, secular, and faith-based, from kindergarten through terminal degrees. They were matriculating or had graduated, many with honors from institutions claiming an unwavering commitment to academic excellence. These students, to a person, were familiar with the philosophical and ideological perspectives of Plato and Aristotle. They were versed in the explorations of Christopher Columbus and Ponce de Leon and Sir Francis Drake. They were, and perhaps many of us are, thoroughly exposed to the literary contributions of Shakespeare and Twain, and exposed to the literary contributions of Breckinridge and many others. They, and perhaps you in this conference today, are conversing on the thinking of Locke and Jefferson and Rush and Franklin. Many of us have a great appreciation of European composers, reserving the term of classical to the music that comes from that part of the world. These students, bright and high achieving students here at the University of Dayton, have been required to think deeply on the theological perspectives of Luther and Calvin and Wesley and Kierkegaard. They were required to engage the great, so-called great thinkers of the Western rationalist tradition. Yes, these students were well educated and they had the grade point averages and scholarships and degrees to prove it. Yet, when you think about the state of the curriculum and the state of race, and as it's reflected in the curriculum, the large majority of these students knew nothing of the great pre-colonial kingdoms and cultures of Songhai and Ghana and Mali. These well-educated students then and many today who represent the best and the brightest products of institutions committed to academic excellence were not required to study the rich legacy of African resistance to chattel enslavement from the inception of the transatlantic trade from the 15th century through the passing of the 13th Amendment. They were not required to examine and appreciate and critique the beauty of African history and culture or those of other marginalized groups. Martin Delaney, Anna Cooper, Countee Cullen, Charles Drew, Ida B. Wells, Henry Highland Garnett, Robert Smalls, Francis Harper, Maggie Walker, and I can go on and on and on. Marcus Garvey, Carter G. Woodson, James Baldwin, Fannie Lou Hamer. These giants of history in their respective fields has the state of race moved these narratives and these stories to the center of our curriculum at the University of Dayton, so that a student by the time they have graduated have been exposed to these voices and these narratives that have shaped not only our past, but our current moment. Yet these and other untold stories were and are virtually unknown to many of our students, and I would say many of our faculty. Not the faculty who have chosen, brilliant faculty, some of whom are on this call, on this meeting today, and others who have navigated the realities of systemic racism in institutions and have achieved more inclusive curricula to expose students to truth from multiple perspectives. Many of these faculty are, and others, however, other faculty have continued to have this marginalized kind of curriculum that marginalizes our voices and prevents us and many of our students to understand the concept of race, the construction of race, the conditions that created this construction and the policies and practices over time that have continued to inform the kinds of disparities and inequalities and inequities that still persist not only on our campus but in the broader society. So I hope that as we go down this road today, while I celebrate the efforts of this university and others across our nation to achieve racial justice, to actually impact and achieve radical transformation of the state of race here at the University of Dayton and beyond, we do have a long, long way to go. And I do think the curriculum itself is probably the one barrier that I think with all the work we've done around educational reform and race relations before, the canon, has largely been unchanged. And I think there's an opportunity for us to continue to work that those here and others that are doing to really to understand this concept of race, to disrupt systemic forms of racial oppression, and to dismantle those policies and practices that would allow us to be here 5 years from now, where we could look back and say that as a result of the efforts, the conversations that we're having, and the efforts that we're making, that there's a substantive difference and a measurable difference of the work that we're doing to change the landscape around race relations. So thank you, Dr. Amin. Thank you for your vision, and thank you for your leadership. And for those on this call, I look forward to the journey over the next several days. Thank you very much.
Hey, Dr. Bonney, thank you very much for the presentation. And I want to also underscore that tomorrow afternoon, the session which has been organized again by Dr. Bonney and Ms. Meredith Allen is the alumni voices. I mean, so both talked about our students, past, those who have been here and left, and they are in careers outside, doing different things. And that I would encourage you again, the session is tomorrow afternoon from 3 to 5 p.m. Again, as I hear the presentations, a lot of things continue to come through my mind. And hopefully we'll be able to have conversations about many of these things once we get into the Q&A session, once we get to that session, right? And so right now I will turn over to Dr. Tom Morgan, right? Tom, it's all yours.
Hello, everyone. I guess I'd like to start by thanking all of my fellow sort of collaborators in planning this. I came to be involved with this. I was involved in the 2016 critical examination of our times as one of the sort of planners for that. And I think it's important to think about sort of where we've been and where we've come to. I think if we think about the then versus now, I'm in English. I'm currently director of race and ethnic studies. Then I was in English, now I'm in race and ethnic studies. Race and ethnic studies did not exist 5 years ago on this campus, though there was plenty of curricular work that would contribute to these particular minors. And I think that that's an important moment of growth for this university, although there's still, as Dr. Burnley said, a long, long ways to go. I think that also sort of the role that Dr. Burnley plays right at this institution did not exist 5 years ago, and that we are intentionally taking steps to move from the then to the now to continue moving forward, I think, in important ways. And I'm happy to see sort of where the university is moving. And so for me, the then versus now is particularly interesting. I would like to imagine that in 5 years from now, if and when we have a similar sort of event, that the landscape is equally different in a positive and progressive manner, as this, for me, the 5-year shift from 2016 seems. I think that if we're going to think about the particular panel that myself and Dr. James are hosting, the staff and faculty perspectives, for me is particularly important in a couple of ways. We chose to focus on some of the faculty and staff members who have been at this university for a while. And for me, that's been particularly important because one of the people we talked to was Herbert Woodward Martin, who for me was particularly important in my own professional development as a Dunbar scholar. I knew Dr. Martin before I came to Dayton. Right, I had conversed with him. He quickly became one of the few people who could actually answer questions for me about Paul Laurence Dunbar and my work. And so it was particularly important. And so when I got an interview here, I was super excited to meet him. That was actually one of the most important things. They're like, what would you like to do while you're on campus? I'm like, can I meet Dr. Martin? And if we're thinking about sort of my professional development here, that many of the people we talked to have probably been some of the more significant people, right? And people in this call have been significant to my professional development here. And for me, that's particularly important. I don't always think that the university has always foregrounded those people, those voices, and that history as much as it needs to do. And I think that part of the work that our particular panel is doing is trying to sort of correct some of that. Our institutional memory is not as strong as it could be in terms of remembering this particular past and the contributions that have been made by faculty and staff over the last 50 years. And again, just to point to Dr. Martin, right? In 2022, in June 2022, we're going to have the 150th anniversary of Paul Laurence Dunbar's birth. Right? In 1972, Herb Martin, in his second year at the university, right, hosted the 100th anniversary of Paul Laurence Dunbar's birth. Brought together a fantastic and super exciting group of authors and poets to speak about Dunbar's legacy. And while again, it's 1972 is a very different time than today, a lot of the marking of that particular sort of moment exists maybe in the academic sense, but not necessarily on campus, or there's not necessarily as visible of a mark of the legacy of that work on campus, at least as much as I might like to see, although I might be biased because I like me some Paul Laurence Dunbar. That's fair to say. But I still think that if we're thinking about sort of the continued types of movement that we as a university need to make, that's one of the types of places that we can go. I guess before turning this over to Denise, because I'm sure she has her own perspective, the last thing I'd like to sort of offer specifically, as a white faculty member, I think it's important for me to highlight that and this again, speaking more to sort of some of my white colleagues, faculty and staff both, right? We oftentimes imagine ourselves as allies and collaborators to faculty, staff, and to students on campus, thinking that we're doing the good work, right, of helping out make their experience here better. But oftentimes it happens without actually a sincere or heartfelt engagement with those non-white faculty and staff who we engage with, and we end up doing more harm than good. We sadly don't have a very good record of retention with faculty and staff on campus. That's something that hasn't changed from then to now. I think that if we're going to do a better job, us as white faculty, staff, and students need to do a better job of getting to know personally, in depth, and in detail, right, our colleagues, so that we can support them in their needs and know that we're doing the type of work and giving them the type of support that they need. For me, that's been something that's very important for me, and it's hard work, but I think it's the sort of one of the more difficult paths, but one of the more important paths we need to sort of collectively engage as we move forward. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to Denise.
Let me, so again, Tom, thanks very, very much. And one of the things which before I turn it over to Denise is also say when the session is, right? The session is tomorrow afternoon, again from 3 to 5, alumni voices. No, I'm sorry. I mean Wednesday morning from 10 to noon. And I know that some of my students are participating in this. I sign on to this particular one. So my students, of all of them, the entire class, agree that they will be at your session, Tom, right? So that we have in class at your session. So they will be there. So all of them. So again, thank you very much for that presentation. Again, as I said, that as everyone is speaking, a lot of ideas are coming through my head and or coming to my mind, and hopefully we'll be able to have those conversations as we proceed. So I'm going to turn over to Dr. Dennis James, right, to continue. Let me see, when this box is okay. Good.
So thank you so much, Julius and Tom. And I'll start by saying that this is a long sort of road with this symposium from 5 years ago. I was a part of that first symposium, I personalized my remarks in a way. We were asked to talk about sort of our perspective and how we came to do this, and how perhaps how I've come to be a part of this symposium again, and what might be different. I came to the University of Dayton in 2008. Sometimes when I say that these days that it's been 12 years, going on 13, it boggles the mind. I feel like I blinked and then I was here for over a decade. And when I first came to Dayton, Ohio, both to interview, but then also to live, I had only ever been in Ohio one time before. And that was about 7 or so years earlier to come to be a part of a group of activists who came to protest against police brutality in Cincinnati that had happened and stopped a conference we had planned on having in Cincinnati in 2001. Some of you who have been in the region for a while may remember those things. So I knew very little about Dayton, Ohio before I got here, but was pleasantly surprised at the way that my professional association does interviews. We used to do them at a hotel and you would go to all of your interviews. And so this University of Dayton interview was one of a few. I was happy to have a few interviews. And I sat down with people who would later become my colleagues and was instantly interested. I would, because as philosophy is a very traditional discipline, it has some of all of those stereotypical things you think about, sort of ivory tower intellectualism. That is a part of what my tradition has in its history. I got the sense from these 4 UD philosophers that maybe this place, which had as a part of its mission social justice, was a place for me to do the sorts of philosophy that I'm interested in. I'm a philosopher who is interested in centering Black thinking in the US as a part of a philosophical approach to what is the best sort of life. I tell my students all the time, we have, as Dr. Burnley referenced, a curriculum that normalizes certain perspectives, ideas, beliefs about what it means to be not just who we are, but who we are as a collectivity, as a part of a social world. Very soon after coming to the University of Dayton, 2 things manifested themselves to me that I was both happy about and then immediately saddened by. And that was my philosophy colleagues were true to the picture they presented at that interview. They were welcoming, supportive, and inclusive. For the most part, that entire faculty really supported me in thinking about how to establish myself as a faculty person who was interested in a subfield of philosophy that at the time had very few people, and still in relative numbers, very few people interested in it. I was going to do Black women's thinking, and that was something that was important to me. And my colleagues said, yes, it's something that's important to us. And I was very supported. I was supported by the dean's office. I got great colleagues and friends. And that year, and then 3 years running, there were all of these US News and World Reports and all these other reports that rank colleges. And they kept saying UD was in those top colleges of happiest students. But in those first 3 years here, I kept having people in my office, students in my office, mostly students of color, not just Black students, but students of color who were saying they were having a hard time and that their experiences at the university were not jiving with this sort of brand of the university. And then I start to talk to my other colleagues. And I realized as people came and went in the faculty ranks that some of my peers were not in departments that were as supportive, that they were having very, not different, but differently handled experiences with micro and macro aggressions in their daily walk as faculty persons. And then increasingly, I became friends with and had built relationships with staff who found themselves at a university where everyone was happy, but there were all of these cracks. And these cracks really did cut across our status as folks at the university and had a lot to do with race. And so I had in those first few years here this odd experience of being someone, perhaps because of my personality, that can weather some sorts of microaggressions really well, and not having any sort of sense that this was, the type of deep issue that it was on one hand, and being someone who had become privy to and a part of a constant struggle for some folks on the other hand. And so very early on, I found an affinity with some folks who were interested in advocating for and advocacy about issues related to race on campus. And so I started to give these talks about everybody being happy at UD. Some of you were at some of those early talks when I was pre-tenure. And very soon, some of those same very supportive people start to send me emails and catch me in the hall and say, "But Denise, aren't you happy here?" And then I realized that there was something that was happening, not just to me, but to lots of my colleagues, especially faculty and staff colleagues, where there was real attention paid to the sort of personal effects of particular instances of what had been racism or sexism. But when it came to the structural fix that would make it so that someone wouldn't have to say after the meeting or come to see me in the hallway, the university was lagging behind other universities I knew about those things. And also that I had a sense that this was something that I was called to be a part of, right? I could have kept having the same sort of experience I was and not been a part of the type of community that I later became a part of and feel really attached to, but I didn't. I did that pre-tenure. And as that time of my life was ending, Dr. Amin came, I remember you came down to my office, Julius, and said, "I'm gonna have the symposium." And there was a sense that this was going to be a bit controversial, that something like this had not happened in the way it happened. And I think now we remember it. We have a different administration. We're seeing this now from a different lens. But I do have a sense that there was some thought that this was something that sort of big and different, and that we ought, be mindful that people would find this controversial. Fast forward, right? These 5 years, things have changed structurally and things have changed experientially. In that same time, we had students who were participating in Black Lives Matter, students who were really coming into their own as activists and advocates. And in the same time, I wondered, where was the activism and advocacy for my colleagues who are faculty and staff? And so when I think about this current instance of this symposium and the work that we did in the group that Tom and I are co-chairing, I really started to think about how institutional memory around the contributions of faculty and staff is often lost, right? Especially when we think about issues of how the university has changed, how the university has lived through its history with people who work here. And so our session that we are co-chairing on Wednesday has the fabulous support of Jalen Turner, who is a junior history major, who is going to give us some perspective from the archives. We're going to talk about some of our treasured colleagues, both faculty and staff, who have been at the University of Dayton for many years. We're going to hear from them in their own words. We asked them a series of questions. And mostly what sort of I've gotten out of this experience, as opposed to the last time we did this, is that I'm not a hopeful person. I'm extremely pragmatic. In fact, it's one of my areas of expertise in philosophy, a type of pragmatism. And for me, hope is the thing that you have because it helps you persist, right? I get it. But the practical part of me is really interested in what can we do? What are the possibilities, and what can we envision for the future? At the last symposium, we envisioned more structure around our diversity and inclusion efforts. Those things, I think, as Tom mentioned, have come in some ways to transform the university, at least in its institutional leadership chart. I think now I'm really interested in how we can think about how we can integrate and keep in mind and transform the university to think about having a more diverse and inclusive faculty and staff, particularly around folks who are Black identified. And so I look forward to seeing you all at the rest of these sessions, and I'm excited about what the week will hold.
Again, thank you very much, Denise. And kind of when you said, when I walked into your office, I said, oh, well, yeah, you know, you're right. I mean, I walked in for us to talk a little bit about this. I think we spent about an hour just conversing about this issue. So there are a lot of very important issues, and I'm really, really glad that Denise is able to bring, to personalize this and talk about that journey to becoming part of this. One of the things I want to remind the audience, again, as I said, put questions on the chat, or if they're in a way that you don't want to put it out just to everyone, forward them to me or to Heidi Haas. We're all signed up on the chat. On the chat. And again, as I said, after the presentations, we're all going to get into some discussions and questions and everything. So we're going to turn to Dr. Joel Prois, who is also, again, as I said, not a cut over, brought over from the previous symposium, right? So I'm not taking away some of the thunder from Joel in terms of, so there are a few people here who were part of the 2016 symposium, I mean, part of the committee. And Joel is one of them. And so I will turn over to you, Joel. All right, let me.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
We're good? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Julius. Thanks, everybody else, both for being here and to the committee members and everything. We're here to kick off a powerful week of sessions. So I come to this work as someone situated in the field of human rights, and in particular with a curiosity about how stories and narratives promote or hinder the pursuit of human dignity. Whose stories, for what purposes, in the service of whose interests? Increasingly, both in my teaching and my research, these curiosities have led me to thinking more intentionally about notions of testimony as unique forms of first-person accounts of experience with abuse and marginalization. I also confront these issues in my work with the Human Rights Center through the Moral Courage Project, where we produce multimedia platforms that feature the experiences of individuals who witness and shape human rights resistance in the United States. If you'll indulge me in a moment of self-promotion, the trailer for the new season of our podcast, which this round focuses on the fight for water in Flint, Detroit, and Appalachia, is now live on SoundCloud and elsewhere. Okay. The session I'm running on Wednesday is called Testimonies, and it revolves around audio stories submitted by Black UD students, current and former, that will frame a critical discussion about how the Black experience is integrated into the stories we tell about life on our campus. In many ways, I see our work through this symposium and beyond connected to a field related to human rights known as transitional justice. Transitional justice is concerned with how societies deal with their own abusive past as a set of practices designed to prevent democratic backsliding and the potential lurch toward future violence and instability. Transitional justice can take many forms too, from criminal trials to truth commissions. And well-known global cases include post-apartheid South Africa and societies recovering from genocide, such as the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. At the heart of these processes is a desire to publicly address what happened and deliver some form of justice to survivors, and through these efforts, to foreground accountability, heal society, and reconcile difference, or at least provide space for transparently facing our differences such that they don't descend into insecurity. Transitional justice is also very much in the air in the United States today. For instance, the proposal to establish an investigatory commission to develop a robust and coherent public account of what happened on January 6th at the US Capitol is one very recent example. It's often framed by the imperative to have a shared understanding of what happened there on that day. Going back though, even over the last few years, US society has wrestled intensely with how we deal with the persistent legacies of slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, and racism in general. And we all know these debates. Should we rename buildings and institutions originally named for slaveholders? Should we keep monuments in the public square upon which a Confederate military soldier might be perched on a horse? Is the flag of the Confederacy a symbol of Southern heritage, or a reminder that the rebel army fought to retain the institution of slavery? Historical journalism work like the 1619 Project aims to reorient how we think about the founding of this country. And even in pop culture, shows like The Watchmen or Lovecraft County utilize historical narratives to contextualize the present in a sophisticated way, looking at intergenerational trauma and even introducing historical events into the canon, like the 1921 Tulsa Massacre, which I certainly knew nothing about until very recently. I think furthermore, the establishment of the National Museum of African American History and Culture at the Smithsonian in DC, and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery that documents lynching, for me fall into this category too, because of their insistence that the Black experience is a core component of the fabric of US society in all its gore, struggle, and joy. It's not that US history cherry picks or romanticizes, let me start again. It's not that the US history that cherry picks or romanticizes the past is wrong. Rather, it is incomplete. And in its incompleteness, we are stuck. Without a robust and honest accounting, we cannot and will not move forward to a more equitable society. So taken together, this is transitional justice. Though it remains mostly decentralized and reserved so far for our unofficial and cultural spaces. So to bring this discussion back to campus, I think UD is starting to do this work too. I think of the video from the fall in which President Spina apologized for a letter from a Marianist to W.E.B. Du Bois in 1930, in which the university lied about our refusal to enroll Black students in daytime classes. Apology is another area of transitional justice. When we think of the way in which Canada apologized to First Nations, or New Zealand, they also issued a major apology to Indigenous people there as well for their treatment in the past. Apology. I think also about the naming of the new computer science building for Jessie Hathcock, the first African-American woman to graduate from UD, who was named in the letter to Du Bois. And I wonder how the anti-racist statement, the creation of race and ethnic studies, and even the concrete work in West Dayton figure into a broader reckoning with our past, based on repairing relationships and forging new memory as the basis for a more just future. And so finally, I believe that truth-telling must be at the center of any institutional transitional justice process. And that is the work we're here to do this week, to share stories and craft new narratives that are more inclusive, more robust, and more complete, even if they are at times ugly and uncomfortable. They serve a greater constructive and indeed constitutive purpose. We can literally reconstitute and remake ourselves in the process of this work. So thanks again for being here. Julius, I yield back. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the comments. And again, Joel is sharing the session testimonials on Wednesday at from 3 to 5, right? I mean, so again, I want to echo the committee by thanking all of you for being here, and to also say that we have the keynote coming up on Wednesday evening, right? The topic is Why Black Catholic History Matters, and is to be delivered by Dr. Shannon Williams, who is the Albert Lepage Assistant Professor of History at Villanova University, and a distinguished lecturer for the Organization of African Americans. Again, we have a great lineup for this week. Before we get into our discussion, let me just also take a few minutes just to give you an idea of my kind of journey into this conversation, right? I mean, how I got involved in this conversation. I mean, I grew up, some of you know, I was born and raised in Cameroon in West Africa. I did my undergraduate degree in the University of Cameroon, where going through schools in Cameroon where this exceptionalism of America, right, was being taught. I mean, as this wonderful, great nation. and unique in the world, right? The arsenal of democracy and everything. And then, but very little was being talked about the experiences of African Americans, of Blacks in America. When I left the university, I became friends with a Peace Corps volunteer who was in Cameroon. An African American Peace Corps volunteer was in Cameroon, and his name is Alvin Blake, right? And so we spent a lot of time. He was talking to me about what it means to be African American in America, right? I mean, there were just a lot of stories. We just spent a lot of time and just talking about that. And he educated me a lot. And when I arrived in the United States, I went to school in Lubbock, Texas Tech University, and realized that no amount of reading, no amount of conversation could have prepared me for the experiences of being Black, right? No amount of reading. I mean, again, as I said, I could not count how many times in Lubbock when I was referred to as a boy, do this and that type of stuff. And I have friends whose parents who come from local communities in Texas, like Tahoka, the parents worked in cotton plantations, and we would go there, right, and see the parents, visit the parents, and just the conditions were just unbelievable, and the treatment of Blacks by some of these cotton farm owners were just unbelievable. And so I ended up doing a lot of interviews of elderly Blacks in that community, but also there at the university, there were some real powerful people, Blacks who were so determined to try to get things going, to try to change things, even though their voices were not being heard, but they were so determined right there. I learned so much from them. I was influenced tremendously by them in terms of that things do not have to be the way they are. And so, but right from that time, again, as I said, so many people have seen so many things, and so many people have influenced how I came to this journey, right? In terms of, I remember this elderly person in Texas talking to me about when I was interviewing for a project. He said, look, the worst thing to do is to just throw your hands in the air that, look, things are the way they are, there's nothing more that can be done. I've done everything I can. And he said, that's the worst thing to do. And so again, the reason I mention this is that it's really, really important that we hear that all the committee members talked about how they came to this journey. It's a really important journey. It's a really important story for our university. I mean, Larry talked about the significance of the curriculum. I mean, Tom, Denise, Merida, Ashley, they all talked about how these stories do matter, because whether we like it or not, we are the University of Dayton. We are part of the University of Dayton. And so we have that obligation. The audience, again, we have that obligation to make the place different from, I tell students in my class that a very significant thing is that we spend all the time inheriting and benefiting from what the generation before us left. We don't do enough to leave something for the next generation. What are we doing to leave something for the next generation? So again, I'm gonna stop talking here and then open it up for questions and comments. I don't see any questions there, but anyone can just go ahead and comment or speak, right? As we, let me put everyone back in the little box, right? So that everyone can go ahead and make, if you want to start talking, just raise your hand, and Tom, our host, will be able to unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. So the floor is all yours. Yes, Amy?
Thanks. Tom, I didn't know that you were the Director of Race and Ethnic Studies. I apologize, somehow I have missed that that's been an addition to the English department. Do you think that that's having an impact on the broader curriculum throughout the department. Like I know that history, Dr. Lawrence Sanders talked to SGA last night for a little while about the history department undergoing a review of their curriculum to see how diverse it is and what diverse voices are present. Is that same kind of thing happening in English?
So I'm actually not actually in the English specifically in race and ethnic studies. Actually, it's in the college. So that's, from my standpoint, an even better thing. I think that that bigger picture sort of placement and that bigger picture important is particularly a good thing. I guess I'll identify a couple of things, because quite clearly the work that I'm doing as a sort of director of that draws upon work that, like, many people here in this call, right, and many people that actually Dr. James and I talked to were involved in creating, right? Dr. Amin, Dr. Donna Cox, right? Longstanding developers of like the Africana Studies minor that exists, because there's 3 minors in the program. There's Africana Studies, there's Latinx and Latin American Studies, and there's Race and Social Justice. And so I'm in many ways sort of picking up work that's been done and trying to sort of move it forward. I've been very heartened because actually I've gotten a significant amount of interest from students, right? The program started last year. Last year we graduated 4 minors. This year, in the second year, we will have 8 minors that are graduating. So as you know, a solid start for me, that means a lot. We also have our first dedicated class being taught this semester, right? There's now a race and ethnic studies, introduction to race and ethnic studies, like a 200 level class. It was full. I capped at 20 and I had 20 students in it. So for me, that when I was honest, I was kind of shocked it filled the first time. And I think it's good. I think that there's a fairly large amount of interest from students, specifically to understand the sort of ongoing events that are happening right now in the world, right? Quite clearly, I think that there's many who don't know what to do. And I think that, you know, it's been made very apparent to me that the program has very disparate audiences. On the one hand, right, it seeks to validate a particular group of students who have not been validated before, their histories, their experiences. And for them, that's very exciting to see themselves reflected in the curriculum, right, in a particular space. It also then speaks to sort of our white students who may be interested but are confused and don't know much, right, and want to learn more and want to sort of be part of some of the types of solutions, right, to pursue the social justice that is our Marinist charism. And it's been interesting to sort of see that. And so I guess to circle back, I'm quite happy with the sort of developments. I mean, like moving forward, the goal is to create a major, which will take some work to do so. I think we have the curriculum, but that curriculum is not as regularly offered. So part of the ongoing work is to assess and think through some of that. And this is also in part because like it's difficult for me to separate some of the different hats I wear. I'm also involved with the Diversity Institutional Learning Goal Working Group. And if we think about the sort of habits of inquiry and reflection, right, and the sort of like larger work that's been ongoing with that, we have our 7 habits of inquiry and reflection. The diversity one sort of has signaled previously sort of diversity is good without much of a scaffolded model for how to think about developing capacities in our students to sort of learn more. And so some of the work that myself and others have been involved with prior to this were like sort of how do we build a scaffolded sort of series of beginner, intermediate, advanced skills we'd like our students to develop. And then how do we sort of map our larger curriculum, right, in the way that sort of like Dr. Burnley was identifying. Right, and that can be at the curricular and the co-curricular level because it's not just like the classroom is the only space that this happens. That's a lot of interesting sort of work to map out and trace out. There's also like comparing and benchmarking that to other like our other peer institutions and what are they doing, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And so I guess there's at least some starting place to answer your question. But I've been very happy with the sort of interest I've seen from students specifically. And I think even moving ahead to talk about the ways in which many people mentioned, if we're going to be successful in transforming on the faculty and staff side, and specifically the faculty side, many of the departments that exist would like to hire people to do this work, but they themselves can't support this. We have to think interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary in ways to create support networks across the university to sort of like make a nurturing space that will be successful at retaining the types of people we want to hire. And I think that a space like race and ethnic studies can sort of help do some of that important type of work, big picture, moving forward. At least I hope it can.
Thank you.
Go for it, Dorian.
Yeah, thank you so much for the different statements that were given at the beginning. I found it very illuminating, and I wanted to ask a question of Dr. Burnley, because I was very happy to hear about the call for curricular reform that you gave us today. I wholeheartedly support that, and we've already heard that in the history department, we're also working on this already. And my question that always comes up in my mind when I think about sort of an inclusive curriculum is how that squares with another important initiative that we have at the University of Dayton, which is the Catholic intellectual tradition. I always in my head try to put these two together. And the reason why I bring it up is that I think that the Catholic intellectual tradition can be conceptualized in many different ways, and everybody has a different definition of it. In fact, I still have yet to hear a definition of it. But to some people, for sure, it means a tradition means a canon. And so I think any tradition at least has the potential to prioritize normative content. You have to describe this for core curricula. And I think that maybe is a danger or a risk of any tradition that we want to emphasize. So my question is how to put these two together. If we have a curricular reform, that means CAP proposals. CAP proposals in the humanities, in history, philosophy, religious studies have to have a definition of how they represent the CIT. So it is actually a very pressing question for any curricular reform on how to do this. So my question is, do you have a sense for how we can think about the Catholic intellectual tradition so it doesn't work against your call for curricular reform?
Thanks, Dorian, for the question. Very good question, in fact. And I think it's a complex question that deserves a complex response, and I'll try to take on a portion of it here. I think, we have to, one, I think the Catholic intellectual tradition and those who embrace it and lift that up as normative and in some ways tied to excellence needs to be willing to critique itself through multiple lenses. There are ways in which the Catholic intellectual tradition itself privileges particular voices, for instance, that one could argue is Eurocentric. And I don't mean to make the point that the fact that it's Eurocentric in and of itself is somehow poor or negative, but the very exclusion of other narratives and voices that brings other perspectives and other norms and other values that could enrich the Catholic intellectual tradition is often met with resistance, a resistance that that is motivated by keeping the historically marginalized voices where they are on the margins, if not totally invisible, right? It's almost to the point of demonizing and dehumanizing these other narratives and the histories and cultures and historical phenomena that has shaped these other narratives. So I think, just a reframing of the norm, the normatization of our notion of excellence and what that means. The Catholic tradition, intellectual tradition is tied to this commitment to the common good. How does that actually play itself out? Whereas for instance, we as a Catholic institution, it's not unique to UD and it's not unique to Catholic higher education. We continually, graduate students making the claim that we've given them the very best education, and still we have these voices that are marginalized. So a question could be, how do we reconcile a commitment to excellence and being a university for the common good, for instance, when we produce students who know so little about the histories and contemporary realities of marginalized groups through the lenses of the voices of those groups themselves, right? These groups and these individuals offer extraordinary value to the not just the Catholic intellectual tradition, but the human intellectual tradition. So I think beginning to come to grips, recognizing the inconsistencies, the incongruencies, the conflicts, the contradictions, as I mentioned, will be important. And I think the University of Dayton is positioning itself to do that in our work. And I think, that can be measured and identified in a number of ways. The kinds of conversations going on in your department, in Denise's department, and then other and other venues of the university, where we're now rethinking and looking at the Catholic intellectual tradition through the lens of inclusive excellence, through the lens of historically marginalized groups, which is moving us toward actually being more of that community of the common good.
Thanks for that perspective. That's really insightful.
Thank you for the question. I really appreciate it.
I had a question. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to all the speakers today. I thought everything you had to say was really, really interesting to hear. This is just kind of broadly, as a white student on this campus, how do you think that we can go about making our Black peers and other Black students feel more comfortable?
I think primarily one of the ways is to sort of listen. If you're looking for a starting place that anyone can do, listening is a good way to sort of hear and validate experiences that are coming. If we want to break it down in the big picture across intersectional identity, right, there's lots of differences across this, but we're talking just from like a racial lens, right? White people are going to have difficulty seeing outside of that white perspective. And so the more that they're able to listen, the better off. Second, I would say challenge yourself in the curriculum and in the co-curriculum. Look for places in classes for your CAP requirement classes where you can challenge yourself to do more. Don't just save it for the sort of CAP DSJ class. Think about ways which you can sort of push yourself, right, across the board. And if you're really interested, right, come talk to me about a minor in race and ethnic studies. There's lots of ways to do that. Curricularly, join other sort of like groups on campus. There's lots of them looking for different perspectives. You don't just have to pursue things that you already know. You can find new things to pursue along the way. One of the things that's specific for me been very sort of, I would guess I'd say one of the happiest things I am about sort of being at the University of Dayton. The social justice perspective that comes with Americanist charism has allowed me to sort of push students to think in ways that I did not experience at previous state institutions. And I continually value that opportunity. And I think that that's a good way to think for students to think about moving some of this work forward. Would anyone else like to add?
I would just add briefly, I think one of the question is interesting. I think you asked how to make Black students feel more comfortable. And I think part of the answer is the willingness of students with dominant identities. In this case, we're talking about race, so I'll name it as white identities, their willingness to be uncomfortable. The willingness to engage in spaces, conversations that go beyond their comfort zone. This really ties to Tom's, Dr. Morgan's conversation, I should say Dr. James Julia, in terms of their ability to go outside of their own comfort zones and to listen and to experience that and to be self-reflective. And the last thing I'll say is, it's the self-work that we have to do. And I encourage students all the time, don't be satisfied with what you're required to read in pursuit of degrees. Because oftentimes what you're required to read does not include, in equitable ways, those voices and narratives that remain on the margins. And so I'll stop there.
And if, Allison, if you want some opportunities, we can definitely work together to look for ways and spaces to get you involved in diverse settings, communities. We have a great diversity peer educator program that not only educates students, but helps to empower our community together. So contact Megan Wolf, who just celebrated on that note. But we'd love to work together with you. I think that's more than a way that I can't just answer you, but I can show you better. If you're committed, we can work together.
And thanks for asking that question, Allison. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for all your answers.
And also, let me also just kind of add a little something to the interest of students. I mean, based on my experience working, teaching at UD for many years, there is an appetite for students to engage in these conversations. I mean, as talking with Ashley, I think last semester, her class had a waiting list, right? And so and I think it's up to us to challenge the students to lead that direction or to move in that direction of helping our students to think differently, because these are issues which they deal with, right? I mean, so the classroom is, and I understand sometimes the difficulty of us faculty that, look, we may end up saying the wrong thing, and then but increasingly now there are some kind of resources that people can talk to, even in every department, right? That how do I go around learning more about it? Because the reality is that this issue is here. It is not going anywhere, right? We as a university, we have that obligation to make our students, to help our students, to introduce them, because they're gonna go out there to the world. And they should not be experiencing or seeing or learning or hearing about some of these things for the first time. I mentioned before that there were students who participated in the protest, in the summer 2020 protest. And they were asking questions. Why don't we know about this stuff? Why don't we learn about this stuff? And that is something which we should take seriously, because as a historian, I say that sometimes history is or was shaped by moments, right? And so 2020 was a moment, and we're having this conversation because of that moment, right? The university is going towards the anti-racist university, partly because of that moment. There may be a little more to it, right? But that moment pushed things. And so my point here is that we should, race and racism is messy. It's not, it puts people on the defensive, put people on the offensive. The conversation is messy, but it's a conversation that we must have, right? History itself is messy, right? And so my point, just to add to this conversation, is that we should not be afraid to move into uncharted territory, uncharted areas, because it also helps us to. I mean, I was in my class today. I teach history of South Africa this morning. I was talking with students who were talking about the shaping, and everyone on this Zoom knows about South African history. And I mean, students were talking about at the turn of the 20th century, which some of the things that South Africa was doing, they were learning straight from the United States. I mean, so how is it possible that South Africa will be developing some of these racial policies from lessons in America? The students were doubting that, right? And so what you find here, again, as I said, because they think about, they don't, I mean, they want to know, right? That things are good, but there are issues which have to be addressed. And we have that obligation to kind of push the students to move in this direction to address some of these issues, right? So I'm gonna stop. My job here is to kind of be pointing at people, not to talk. I'm gonna stop talking. It's other questions, comments. Denise, yeah.
So one of the things that I always worry about when we have discussions about race here at the University of Dayton, and especially when we're talking about anti-Black racism, and that I'll broach here to this group and probably every time someone talks to me about this, is often we frame these conversations around issues of comfort and belonging. And some of philosophers are interested in questions of belonging. And we center certain experiences and marginalize others, even as we have conversations about belonging and inclusion. And so the assumption often is that students do not know or have not heard or have not experienced, when the truth is there is a subset of our students that do know, have experience, right? And that is where the center of their experience here at the university is. And so one of the things that I tell people, especially colleagues who want to talk about, well, how do I talk about these tough issues in class and what do I do, is one approach is to get rid of some of our, or try our best to denormalize, decenter, and get rid of our understandings of who belongs, right? If we are committed to sort of community as building and in process as always, that everyone who shows up belongs. And what that does is it complicates sort of the history we tell, right? So earlier, we mentioned, thinking about the university's past when it comes to integration, right? And we have a perspective of sort of what the university said about Jessie Hathcock's experience here, what it means in the present day, to name, the computer science building about her here. And it's often a conversation that really does assume and normalize a certain type of knower and subject, right? When I think part of what we can do is really try to push our bounds about sort of what when we're teaching, when we're talking to students, when we're talking to our colleagues, showing up first with the really radical assumption that we all belong, and all of those histories, all of those experiences are part of us being in this place. Doing that, and this is something, I had to think about a lot when I started to really think about my own philosophical work and how I was going to reteach myself part of my training, which is in really traditional Western philosophy, social and political philosophy. And it was not that we are welcoming new people or that we are learning something new, but rather what we're doing is really opening up sort of our understanding and our frame to all of the folks that are here, right? And to think about how to prepare for other folks to come. And I think that really does, and it's hard work and you have to keep doing it, but I think that really does shift, especially when we're talking about issues of race, how we approach it, right? We often assume, right, that we're teaching just to the people who don't have experiences of racism. But actually we're teaching to folks who have experience, having prejudicial views. We're teaching to folks who have experience of it themselves. And I had that actually happen to me as someone who teaches at the university and teaches about, topics that are far ranging and I think often considered controversial. I once had a student tell me that she didn't want to take my class anymore because it made her uncomfortable to talk about racism to me, right? I was the only Black person in class. And I think often, and I'm the teacher, and I think often, and I was teaching then, and I was doing all these things. And I think often we sit, the way that we think about these things has to shift. And also we have to be more expansive when we're thinking about how we're even changing our curriculum and our practices. And for me, that was something to think about, even becoming sort of okay with the fact that that was an experience that I was having and that I had to sort of work through, and thinking about what did that mean for my other colleagues of color, like just thinking about that more expansively. And so I would challenge us to really think about, when we're talking about educating the university and learning things from our past, to really sort of open ourselves to everybody is here, or at least lots of people have been here. And what does it mean when some of us are no longer here? And what does it mean when some of us pass out of our sort of world of knowers that we have on campus? And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about in our session with faculty and staff will have to do that. Some of the ways in which we lose part of our community, and we need to rediscover those things.
Yeah, just to build on that, Denise, I just transparently, my own journey, I was reading some research maybe a couple of years ago, and part of my dissertation research is around intergroup communication. So I'm really interested in the ways in which we're socialized to communicate, right, within and across groups. But neither here nor there. Part of what I think we as an institution have to remember is the language we use and the ways in which we communicate with and across groups. And sometimes we inadvertently, and we have been socialized to talk about helping others build, right? So helping students of color build community, when really that takes the responsibility from the institution, who should be providing the space, who should be providing the connections and the opportunities. So putting that accountability and that responsibility on those said groups who, you know, are feel less seen, heard, felt in these spaces. We do have to remember our institutional voice and who we represent as individuals and a part of that. So just kind of building on that, that struck for me. Yes, that's something we in MEC often really think about. It's not the student's responsibility to identify their resources. It's our responsibility to provide them and to help build those connections for them. Now it's for them to commit, but that's another conversation.
You know, I just to kind of weigh in here too, the question that comes up for me is how do we create policies and practices that helps build institutional capacity to go down this road, right? You know, we're at a place now, and I think even in the anti-racism action plan, I think there's language there that I think is missed, and to me, that I celebrate, and that is, you know, a number of us, I know I certainly have, but a number of us have talked about over the years, moving from a culture where we invite people into these spaces where we're having these difficult conversations. You know, Meredith talks about the conversations, how we communicate. We invite people to come in, and when you look at the demographics, you know, that people who are actually coming into the spaces where we're talking about race and gender and LGBTQ identity and systemic oppression, et cetera, most of us aren't showing up, right? I mean, but now we're moving to a place where we're saying we're moving from invitation to expectation, and we're developing policy, right? Where there's an expectation across the university that we're building the capacity, and we're entering spaces that will make a number of us, all of us in many different ways, uncomfortable. But building the capacity to do that, I think is extremely, extremely difficult. But it's one that has to be made. And it will, you know, we're seeing now is being met with significant resistance. You know, we're doing these assessments across the life of the university that's tied to unit level strategic planning. And we're seeing, you know, there are voices emerging that's, you know, measurable and identifiable in terms of the resistance, right? And this language and kind of ideological perspectives that are reminiscent of kind of a Trumpian mindset. I'll use that language, right here at the university. But I think it's the journey that needs to be taken, in terms of how we learn and how we live into that space of tension, where these are conversations that are part of the work experience here. And they're not really an option, but that they're really required and necessary to be the university that we're saying God is calling us to be.
Other questions? Discussions? So I mean, so I could also, based on some of what we've been discussing, I could also, I mean, kind of throw out a question in terms of, even though we're not there yet, but in the minds of some people here, so what would it be to be a University of Dayton student or a University of Dayton graduate? So at the end of the day, these conversations, we're trying as much as possible to engage our students and to engage ourselves. All right, so how would one what does it mean to be a University of Dayton student or University of Dayton graduate when it comes to issues of race? So I can throw that question up, you know, if someone can take a stab on that, because some of these questions, I mean, we, I'm serving on this group, we're talking about conversations on American democracy. And so one of the guiding questions here, and there are some people here who are part of that, is what does it mean to be an American? And so we can also, given our work and our conversation and what we're trying to do here at the university in terms of race. So this is a symposium on race on the University of Dayton campus. So based on your perspective, what does it mean to be a University of Dayton student, or where would you want a University of Dayton student to be on this topic? Does the question make sense? Does my question make sense? No? I have an excuse. English is not my first language, right? So, but again, so this is, again, we are where we are right now, right? And so this is what, because it will take the combined effort, again, as I said earlier, this is all going to be collaboration and everything, right? We'll take the combined effort of all of us to create or to move our students to a particular place. Where is that place that we want our students to be? Yes, Denise.
So I guess I admit to being confused by the question. Because I actually think that students come out lots of different places in their education. And I think that's important, right? That students come out in lots of different places and have, lots of different possibilities, right? For me, when I think about the purpose of this, right? So my students who are going to be coming to these sessions, when I think about the types of engagements that, say, I'm having with students in classes around these things, part of what I am always interested in, and I'm a philosopher, right, is how folks are thinking through becoming sort of actively interested in these vitally important issues and topics because of what it means for people to flourish in the world, right? So I am not as committed to all the students getting to some place, right? Like that's not a part of my pedagogy or a part of my sort of teaching. I'm not interested in that. That's why maybe it's not great for assessment purposes, right? Like I'm not, interested in that so much as I'm interested in where are the places where we are engaging with one another in these very important conversations in a way that happens at a university, perhaps differently than it happens in other settings, right? So in classrooms, in the co-curricular, our students live together. There are ways that we can engage with them. And one of my favorite sort of thinkers of all time is Lorraine Hansberry. And, she once, wrote in a diary that she just wanted time to think, right? For me, the philosopher, where are the sites, the places, the times that we are engaging with our students and with one another, the space to think, right? The space to think through these things. Because I think often what I fear, is that not only are we teaching subject matters, right, but that we sometimes get really committed to sort of this goal-based, destination-based sort of education, even around the sorts of things that we're interested in, that we don't give people the space, the time to think through these things. And that might be not satisfactory to some folks, but for me, just having the multiple points and sites of engagement that a university can offer that is perhaps different than what they might find in other spaces, not that they can't have these engagements in other spaces, is really important.
Can I jump in? Yeah, just to build off Denise's point, I mean, I don't know if I can speak to, what the student experience is, but I can speak to my position as a educator and as a professor, and one that teaches primarily, mostly African American history courses, and seeing the space and places that these students come from with a lot of hunger and interest. But I think to Denise's points too, there are a lot of different stops along the path, right? So, I mean, one of the first things I do in my classes is I say, what African American history have you had? And we get everything from nothing to like an occasional couple of students who are like, oh, actually, I took a full course in African American history. That's rare, by the way. Most students have very little, right? But, even throughout the semester, students' relationship to the material is very different. So like every student has to be approached in a different way. They're working through the material in very different ways in my class. And you can see some of them actually, and they vocalize this to me, or they write me about it, how it's changing their worldview in real time. And for some of them, this is profoundly disruptive, right? Because it's upending everything that they thought they knew. And inside a university environment, I think my role as professor is to actually respect, some of the students' journeys along this way, in a really patient way that maybe I would not be outside of the academy and outside of the university, or if I were dealing with grown adults, people who were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, but to be super patient with my students who are like, wow, I didn't know this thing, or they're dealing with conflicts, intergenerational conflicts in their own families around a lot of these ideas, working out sort of disruption between them and their intimate relationships and their parents and their siblings and these people who believe different things than they do, asking me how I can help guide them through this through history. And I was like, history can only do so much, right? So, you got the knowledge there. I mean, I love history. I love it, obviously, but it can only do so much. But I think to Denise's point, like we have students, I can't say by the end of the semester, I want all of my students to have this relationship to history. There are things I hope they know and they understand better, but some of them will come out of it super profoundly changed. Many of them have, thankfully, profoundly changed by what they know. Some of them a little changed. Some of them, depending on their own backgrounds, confirmation of things that they felt already, but didn't really have the history, particularly students of color, that they felt these things, but didn't have the history to actually illuminate what these things were, to say that these are facts, that these are things that have actually happened. I just assumed these happened. Some may not be changed at all. So, I mean, I think, I have to go in with that perspective that, at the end of the semester, I'm not expecting this ground shaking experience for everyone. What I'm expecting is people to sort of meet me along the way, for me to meet them along the way on the journey of what they're learning. And with the hope that my class is not going to be, I think Tom and other people's point, the end of everything that they take at this university, right? Like this can't be your only engagement with the histories of marginalized people. This can't be your only engagement with the scholarship around people of color or people from marginalized communities, because there's so much more out there to learn. So what I hope that I can do is make them interested in learning that this is just one slice of the story.
Yeah, Tom.
I guess I'd like to pick up on what Denise sort of started, the path Denise started us down here. And I think, if we're thinking about sort of like ways we can engage, and this also builds up exactly on what Ashley was just sort of running us through. If we're thinking about sort of like what I do in the classroom, there's 2 points I found in the last couple of years that have been particularly helpful in helping our students think differently and helping me think differently, because it's not just about our students, right? I am also learning and living with them. One is the American Literature Survey class. Oftentimes it's sort of seen as a sort of more rote memorization process. You read a bunch of authors and you garner their bits of knowledge and move on. The last couple of years I've reframed it, and rather than just thinking about it as sort of American Literature Survey, I have taught as a settler colonialism framework, which makes students reconsider every text, important or not, from a different lens. And what does it mean to think about that as a foundational lens for this country, right? How does that give us different types of questions to ask about primary texts? For example, I hope everyone is aware, if we think about the Declaration of Independence, right? That Thomas Jefferson struggled with the idea of slavery, right? And people those who ratified it cut that part out and left it out. No one ever thinks about the merciless heathen savages paragraph that describes Native Americans, which was uncommented on and left intact and is still intact, right? That's for me a sort of particular place where you can have very different conversations, right? Bringing that as a framework for all texts. That's, I think, one particular sort of classroom intervention. The other one is more sort of big picture methodological. A lot of my white students generally tend to think of the history of slavery as harming Black people, right? They never think of the history of slavery as harming white people, right? The socialization that came from that allowed white people to act, behave, and think that they are superior, right? I think is an important question to ask all of our students to contemplate, right? And it's going to sort of have different type of impacts, big picture across the board. And for me, those are like two types of different interventions that we can make that there's not going to be a singular outcome for our students. Ideally, I'm posing questions that will continue to challenge students as we move forward, or they challenge me. So I think that there are important ways to think about how we sort of live and exist in the world.
I mean, and also one of the, just to add a little bit, one of the reasons I was trying to make that point too is that I teach African history, which I always gauge students at the beginning to write down a little thing when they hear of Africa, what comes to their mind, right? And tell them not to write their names on the cat or the note card or whatever. I give them note cards, and of course, over the years, I've seen all kinds of adjectives, and towards the end. At the end of the semester, they've changed the mentality. They can talk about Africa differently. The conversation has changed, right? And of course, I mean, some may still hold on to those views, because you can find, if you do the research on the internet, you can find find evidence to support anything, right? So so my point here becomes, and just as Denise, Tom, and Ashley stated, in terms of that, there are several conversations that take place, and that we need to continue to encourage these conversations, and that our students will gain different things from this conversation, and they may not even get to where, as I said, I want them to get some knowledge about Africa, keep moving very quickly, but they end up getting, you know, whatever they want to get, but they think about the place differently, right? And so, and I think it's good that if we can get our students to think about race and racism differently, from where it started, I think it's a really good thing, because as we've already stated, these are ongoing conversations, right? Both for students and both for ourselves, right? Okay, I said earlier that I really need to shut up, right? So let others speak. But any other comment? We are getting close to our time. Any other comment? In the absence of any comment, again, I want to thank you very, very much. We have a great lineup. As I said earlier, tomorrow we are listening to, there's a student session tomorrow morning. And then in the afternoon, right, we have alumni voices, right? And then on Wednesday morning, we have faculty and staff perspective. And then in the afternoon, we have testimonials. And then in the evening, we'll listen to a keynote speaker. And then on Thursday morning, we have kind of closing arguments, paths forward. Where do we go from here? I mean, so again, I want to thank you very much, and I hope you'll be able to join us in the other sessions, right? There is, unfortunately, I don't know how to clap over Zoom, but I can always say thank you all for coming, right? Thank you. Okay, oh yeah, wonderful, Sarah. So I will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.